I heard my front door open and footsteps come towards my room at 12 a.m., thinking it was my girlfriend. Then my phone buzzed. "Hey, honey, I'm going to be working late tonight." Widows Bay not only received a plethora of coveted Emmy nominations, it proved how small-town horror remains in the hearts of those that love all things spooky. This week, we bring you those stories inspired by coastal vibes with an added dose of New England. After all, if Maine is good enough for the king of horror himself, who are we to question it? I'm Blair Bathory, and welcome to the Something Scary podcast. Thanks for joining us as we descend into the darkness together.
So, want to hear something scary?
Ghost Coast. No tales of coastal horror would be complete without a story set on the sea itself, and what better than a tale of sailors? Or maybe they were pirates. Either way, add them to the mix of the Mary Celeste and the Demeter, and it seems like we have had plenty of warnings of what can happen on those long journeys when land is so far away. Like in this story inspired by Rob. My name is Dr. Thomas Howell. I am writing this on the 26th of February, the year 1719. I am a surgeon, employed on a ship called the Shenandoah. We departed on the morning of the 26th day of December 1718 on a particularly long voyage. Spirits were high. Everyone's jobs were laid out before them, knowing who to report to. Either the quartermaster, Mr. Joseph Burns, a rather crass and unapproachable fellow, or our sailing master, Mr. Benjamin Quarternaro, a better navigator than never was. I didn't much care for working with sailors. A superstitious lot they are. Believing in ghost stories is utter rubbish to a man of science such as myself, or at least I used to think so. It all began the night of the 13th of January. Benjamin had complained of not feeling well for a few days, withering to naught but skin and bone. His breathing shallowed, then on the gray morning of the 26th, Benjamin drew his last. A storm blew in not moments before his passing, as if it were the sole intention of fetching him from the sea. We began the preparations for burial at sea that very night. I can still remember as we wrapped him in the cloth of his hammock and began to tie a cannonball to his legs. Captain Rickert refused to meet any of our gazes. Standing near the banister, Mr. Quarternaro would pass over to the wrathful ocean. After a moment of reflection, the body was tossed overboard and vanished into the white-capped waves that slapped against the ship. A few sailors made the sign of the cross upon themselves. Some threw personal items in after the body. Others yet held their breath for as long as we believed to reach the bottom of the sea. A sign of respect, I presumed. I believed in facts. Spirits are nothing more than an old wives' tale, or at least I used to think so. I woke late in the night 2 days after by a frantic deckhand reporting a grave injury. A sailor had been nailed to the floor by a gigantic cannonball on his left foot. He tried in vain to move it himself, but was far too weak. I instructed the onlookers to pull the ball off and another two to carry him to my quarters. I had the sailor laid out on our operating table so I could get a proper look at his wound. All that was left resembled a splatter of bone and sinew. His foot would need to be amputated. The man's screams were deafening, and they were going to get worse. As I procured the saw, the quartermaster banged in to see the poor lad for himself. He stopped almost immediately when his eyes made the connection between the saw in my hands and the shattered remains of the man's foot, and then he thrust a brown bottle into the patient's hands. "I ain't about to have my boy screaming any more than he oughta." The sailor took several large gulps of the liquor and gave me a small nod. Burns left the room, and I started the procedure. This particular surgery is always difficult. When I reached the bone, the screams became a plea for death to take him that very instant. Eventually, I was able to remove the appendage and wrap the wound. The man was moved over to a hammock so he must rest. I told him I'd be back to check on him later after he'd had time to come out of shock. Later, as I went in to check on the sailor, I heard the drunken attempt at a sea shanty. I quickened my step and banged in to find a chaotic sight. "This man needs to rest," I admonished his mates, shooing them out of the room. "'Tis quite all right, sir," my patient slurred. "I don't fancy living after what happened. It's common to feel melancholy after such a drastic procedure. Ain't the procedure that makes me fear living, sir. It is what I saw that night. Something woke me from a great dream. It sounded like chains, rattling chains. I saw something look like white sheets wrapped around a pole, one hand poking out. 'Twas gray and shriveled. All the while it was making noises like a drowning man. Heavy breaths, but couldn't get no air. It pointed then asked, 'Me eyes. Where are me eyes?' It sounded like Mr. Quarternaro, but he's dead now, sir." With that, the man began to sob. "I was one of the lads who threw him overboard. I knew it couldn't be him. But please, sir, I ain't mad. Next thing, the ship started shaking and a cannonball fell and landed on my foot. I don't much care to live in a world where the dead come back to torture ya." This man lost such an amount of blood that I was shocked he still drew breath. He was clearly delirious, probably from blood loss. I left to fetch fresh cloth, but when I returned moments later, the poor man had died in my absence. Later that night, we all attended one more burial at sea. Same ceremony, same dressing, same method of sinking, a cannonball, which I thought was in rather poor taste. However, if the code of the sea commanded it, it must be followed, apparently. Sleep did not come easily. Something about that young man's conviction and seeing something that shouldn't be. Ordinarily, I could shake these thoughts off with logic, but every now and again, the idea took too deep a root. Perhaps I'd spent too much time at sea, but I began to question things more and more as I heard whispers amongst the crew, asking if others heard rattling chains during the night. Some swore they heard a heavy scraping on the wood planks, almost like dragging a cannonball. I grew convinced something was going on that I had difficulty explaining. The deceased sailor had told only myself what he saw, and God knows I had not muttered a word of it. Then I was summoned again, this time to Mount Burns' quarters. "He ain't right, sir," the crew member relayed. "Something's been keeping him up and scaring the dear life out of him." Upon arrival at the cabin, the lump lay in a hammock that gently rocked with the motion of the sea. I heard a faint whisper. "His eyes. I ain't seen his eyes." My blood ran cold. I slowly removed the sheet covering the quartermaster and screamed as I saw what the poor man had done to himself. Chewed the tips of his fingers down to bone. He stifled the sobs as he continued to pick at the flays of flesh around his appendages. I tried to snap the man out of whatever delusion he was in, but to no avail. Every time I touched him, he would convulse violently and repeat that he hadn't seen his eyes. Never had I seen someone in such a manic state. How would he know about the figure asking for its eyes? I left Mr. Burns' quarters and demanded that no one else enter apart from myself. The men abroad were curious, but I gave them no information. But before too long, the call came again. "Sir, it's Mr. Burns. Please, come quick." I rushed onto the deck, this time as he pointed upward. Mr. Burns was standing on the top of the main mast with one hand on the pole, shouting at someone, but no one else could see. "I don't know where your goddamned eyes are!" Men were imploring him to hold on while others began to climb the ropes. Just then, the Shenandoah hit a wave head-on and shocked the whole ship. Everyone watched as Mr. Burns lost his grip and plummeted. A fall from such a height would never be directly perpendicular, considering the wind and the movement of the ship. We would only watch as he hit the rail of the ship, then fell into the sea before anyone could grab his body. It was the same rail we had tossed Mr. Quaternary over, as well as the amputee. That should have been terror enough, but only then did it truly begin. Rattling chains, heavy scraping, a voice that couldn't draw breath, a body wrapped in white cloth. This thing held the captain by his neck. It raised one gray, shriveled hand and put it to the captain's face. Then it spoke, with the voice of Mr. Quaternary.
"Me eyes."
With that, they plunged their long gray fingers into the captain's eye sockets, who, in turn, screamed in agony. As the entity's hand pulled back, they released the captain's body, which slumped to the floor with a dead thud. The abomination moved the eyes around in its hands, then dove over the side of the ship. All we saw was a blur of white cloth, silver chains, and one large cannonball. We buried Captain Rickert when we arrived back at port, then went on our ways. I never kept in contact with anyone from that awful trip. I truly wished to forget it, and it seemed as if it was all behind me until lately. I lay awake some nights and swear I hear the rattling of chains and scraping of floorboards. It's become much more frequent of late, and I must admit, I have no idea what this means for me. Ghost stories and pirates go hand in hand. Do you have any favorite tales of walking the plank and burials at sea? If so, send them to us at SomethingScary@Snarled.com. And don't forget to subscribe or follow us wherever you are listening so you don't miss a single episode creeping your way. It sounds like a dream come true when you are writing a book and you witness firsthand the very thing you are researching. And if there are never-ending supplies of candy or rooms filled with purring kittens, then maybe it would be exciting. But when it involves the supernatural, being proved right can be downright nightmarish, like in this story inspired by Ively's. This all happened a few years ago after a particularly bad nor'easter. My friend Lucy and I had been driving through New England, stopping at various inns and B&Bs, filming content and doing research for a book on local legends we were writing. Her uncle had a place in Maine right on the beach and had invited us to stay there for a few days so we could go over what we had collected so far. It was safe to drive now that the storm was mostly over, but we still took it real slow, not being used to driving in high winds and snowfall. By the time we arrived at his house, it was already pretty late. The 2-story house was very old and kind of creepy, especially at night, but it would give us the perfect ambiance as we worked through the footage we had recorded so far. Lucy and I were the perfect writing partners. She was born a skeptic, and I always felt a special connection to the supernatural side of life. I've seen things before and others can't, things that aren't physically there and have no explanation. Once we'd arrived, Lucy's uncle gave us a quick tour and showed us the room we'd be sleeping in. The stairs were old and creaky, and with every step I could feel the house settling further into the ground. Lucy hadn't been there since early childhood, her uncle preferring to visit with her parents in NC, where the weather was much warmer. And boy did we feel the cold, so we were especially grateful to be welcomed with hot tea and plenty of warm blankets. It was hard to sleep. Despite being tired from the traveling in the late hour, I just couldn't nod off. Usually the sound of the ocean calms me down, but outside the waves crashed, the lasting effects of the nor'easter. Lucy was sound asleep and I was just contemplating getting up for a glass of water when I suddenly felt the overwhelming sensation of someone or something watching me. Lucy emitted a small snore which indicated she was deep into a REM cycle. I tentatively moved my eyes to the doorway, praying Lucy's uncle had a cat he'd failed to mention, when I saw her, a little blonde girl with pigtails, wearing a tattered dress and nothing on her feet. She was just standing there, not floating, just standing, as if she were really there. I'd had a spiritual encounter before, but nothing as strong as this. There was absolutely no denying she was there. I desperately wanted Lucy the skeptic to wake up and see this, but I couldn't bring myself to make a noise. I hadn't thought I was scared until I tried to speak and couldn't utter a word. In all the years I'd known Lucy, through college, where we both majored in English and psychology, to working on this research project together, all about legends and lore, she'd never once mentioned a haunting in her own uncle's house. Nor had her uncle spoken of it during the times we'd communicated when setting up his visit. And he knew full well what we were writing about. As thoughts and fears whirled around my head, I began to wonder if I had somehow brought her here, or caused her to manifest. And then she began to move. Again, this is when I should have called out, jumped out of bed, switched on the light, anything really, but I was literally frozen in fear, vocal cords included. But instead of coming over to me, again walking like a person, not floating as the media usually portrays spirits, she headed to Lucy as she passed straight through me. I could feel the rage and hatred emanating from her. She wanted to hurt Lucy. Of that I was certain, despite no evidence or reason. As she reached Lucy's sleeping form, her own body, somehow corporal enough to yank the comforter off Lucy, had snuggled into. The fear paralyzing me broke, and I threw myself out of the bed, screaming, "Leave her alone!" As I did, the storm outside also reached a crescendo, and the shutters flew open, causing the heavy door to slam and startle Lucy to fall out of her bed in shock. Lightning struck just in time for me to see the little girl staring at me with an utter hatred in her eyes, like I've never seen before. Then the door was flung open and the light switched on. Lucy's uncle stood in the frame looking extremely confused. When I looked behind me, the little ghost girl was gone. He rushed over and pulled the shutters closed again. I guess he thought we'd been awoken by the storm and scared ourselves like silly teens, rather than post-grads in their 20s. After he had checked that we were okay and promised us the storm was coming to an end, Lucy asked what the hell had really happened. Remember, she's the non-believer in our duo, the Scully to my Mulder, so I was expecting eye rolls from her. However, she explained, upon entering the house yesterday evening, a memory had come flooding back from her childhood. She had never seen anything, but she had experienced negative feelings in the house, the sense that bad spirits lingered. The fact the usual naysayer was admitting even she had felt something inexplicable in the house, coupled with the fact the spirit was an engaged little girl, something meant to be pure and innocent, made it even more terrifying. The next morning, after very little sleep, we didn't ask her uncle directly about the visitor, just whether he had ever had a supernatural experience she wanted to share. But he simply shrugged his shoulders and said while he enjoyed a good ghost story, especially living in Maine, that's all they were. Stories. Despite the validation of Lucy's strange childhood memories, I did begin to wonder in the light of day if the past few months of research had simply taken its toll and I'd succumbed to a night terror. I even started to chastise myself for being so foolish. Until Lucy's uncle's housekeeper walked into the study where we were working. She had 2 steaming mugs of coffee in her hands as she stopped to look at our desk, one photo and the paperwork next to it about someone in Nantucket who'd had a mermaid encounter. "Oh, what fun," she exclaimed. "If you like, I can tell you about Lila. Gave me the fright of my life the first time I saw her in the bedroom. She looks all innocent with those pigtails, but let me tell you, she will cause a right mess if the mood takes her. Lila." The little girl with pigtails in the bedroom, who burned as if she were rage incarnate at the sight of Lucy, was real. At least we'll have another story for our book, but we definitely are moving to a new B&B. Have you ever stayed somewhere that just gave off spooky vibes, even if you didn't see anything specific? Did you run, or did you stay and try and figure out what was going on? You can send us your own spooky encounters at SomethingScary@snarled.com. And now it's time for something from our listeners, and this week I wanted to share an email from Noelle. Thank you as always, Noelle, for sending yet another great story. The embers of the campfire hissed, throwing jagged orange lights against the towering pines of Camp Echowood. It was the final night. The air was thick with the scent of pine needles and wood smoke, but for 14-year-old Avery, it smelled like copper and wet rot. A group of 5 campers sat huddled on log benches. The counselor had long since slipped away to the staff cabin, leaving them to the tradition of the final scare. "Your turn, Avery," one of the boys, Marcus, nudged him. "Make it better than Chloe's. Ghosts in the mirror are kid stuff." Avery sat in the shadows, his face half hidden by the hood of his sweatshirt. He didn't jump in with a joke. He just stared into the coals until the silence became uncomfortable. "You guys know why I'm here alone this year, right?" Avery asked, his voice low and raspy. "Why my twin sister Missy isn't here." The group went quiet. Everyone knew Missy had died in a hiking accident the previous summer, but no one dared to bring it up. "It wasn't a cliff," Avery whispered. "It was the lake. Last August, the night before checkout, we went down to the water. We heard something, dragging itself across the pebbles. It sounded like wet leather being pulled over gravel." Avery leaned forward, the firelight catching a strange glint in his eyes, and said, "This thing wasn't human. It was a mutant, a pale, bloated thing that crawled out of the deepest part of the muck. It had a long, thick tail line with serrated fins. One scratch from those fins, one touch, and the toxin hits your heart. You were dead in 10 minutes. Total organ failure." The camper shifted. A girl named Sarah pulled her blanket tighter. "It cornered us near the old pump house," Avery continued, his voice trembling with faux emotion. "Missy, she saw it coming for me. She threw herself in front of it." The creature's tail lashed out, catching her across the throat. "I ran while I heard her screaming, and I heard the sound of that thing tearing into her flesh. She sacrificed herself so that I could live. It's still out there, you know, living in the lake, waiting for a bigger meal." The woods went dead silent for a moment. Then Marcus burst out laughing. "Nice one, man. The lake mutant? Seriously?" Marcus shook his head. "The counselors tell that story every year to keep us from skinny dipping. It's an urban legend, Avery. Total creepypasta fluff." The other kids joined in, relieved. "Yeah, you almost had us for a second." Sarah chuckled, though her eyes kept darting to the tree line. "The 10-minute toxin is a classic touch." Avery didn't laugh. An evil, jagged grin slowly spread across his face, wider than anything humanly natural. "You're right," Avery said, his voice suddenly dropping an octave. "The story about my sister sacrificing herself is a legend. I made it up." The laughter died instantly. "The truth is," Avery whispered, leaning so close to the fire, the heat should have blistered his skin, "Missy fought like hell. She screamed for me to help her. But I'm a survivor. I tripped her. I pushed her right into those fins so I could get a head start." "Avery, stop, that's not funny," Marcus said, his face paling. "I made a deal with it while it was eating her." Avery went on, ignoring him. "I told it that one girl wouldn't last a year. I told it that if it let me go, I'd come back. I told it I'd bring it a feast. Why do you think I insisted on this specific campsite? Why do you think I volunteered to lead the final scare right here by the water?" From the darkness behind the logs, a heavy, wet slap sounded against the dirt. Then a rhythmic, labored wheezing, the sound of lungs filled with fluid, began to circle the clearing. "It's dinner time," Avery whispered. The campers scrambled to stand, but the shadows seemed to reach out and trip them. A massive, pale shape lunged from the brush. It was a nightmare of the translucent skin and black veins, dragging a lethal bladed tail behind it. The screams were cut short by the wet tearing of meat. Avery stood perfectly still, the grin never leaving his face, as the creature honored their pact, leaving only the boy who had brought the harvest. The end. Thanks again, Noelle, for sending yet another great story. A fancy ball, horse-drawn carriages, a mysterious storm, and a murky body of water sound like a perfect mix of a story told on a dark and windy night, especially if you happen to be in Massachusetts. Just be careful if you hear the distant thunder of hooves, like in this original short written by Janine Pipe. You are invited to our annual late summer ball at the Newberry Manor House on the night of July 31st. Carriages at midnight. The annual affair at the Winchester's coastal estate had been the usual frivolous affair, as the most elite and privileged residents of Massachusetts competed for status and boasted about lineage and wealth. Still, there was only so much dancing, apple cider, and blowing one's own trumpet that could be managed, and Miss Margaret Winstanley was glad to see the clock ticking towards 12 o'clock. Like Cinderella, she would like to be tucked up in her four-poster bed soon after the bells tolled. Stepping outside the manor house, she was disgruntled to see a highly unusual and unexpected New England summer storm had blown in. The high winds whipped her dress around her ankles as she ascended into the waiting carriage that would take her back to her own estate via Lake Vaughan Borough, a deep and unforgiving water best to be avoided at all costs, especially on a dark and turbulent night such as this. Davina Hamilton Weston, a 16-year-old debutante, felt the exact opposite from the spinster Winstanley. She had enjoyed a glorious night of dancing, much to the chagrin of her best friend, Regina Winchester. Her card had been marked by every eligible bachelor present, making her father, Lord Hamilton Weston, who insisted on using his British title despite having been born in Boston, most proud. She had only been glad of the carriage's arrival, as her dainty feet were sure to be covered in blisters. The young Deb, however, was especially pleased to see one last person board the coach before its departure. Rufus Brotherstone was a wealthy young bachelor, and if it was alleged, bit of a cad. That, of course, didn't stop Davina from stealing a glance at him under her lashes. They had enjoyed a dance, and as he led her breathless to the couch to rest after their jig, his hand had lingered a moment more than proper, causing her heart to flutter and cheeks to redden. He smiled as he sat opposite her, and she felt her chest rising in anticipation. The coach lurched as the horses began their journey, and she was jolted forward, allowing gravity to give her a little push. She bumped knees with the gentleman. "Davina!" her father reprimanded as she hurriedly scooted back into her proper seat, face burning. Knocking on the roof with his cane, Lord Hamilton Weston called out, "I say, driver, do take it easy." "Sorry, sir," came the reply from one of the coachmen. "Mare got a bit spooked. Storm is getting stronger by the minute." "Humph," muttered Lady Winstanley into her handkerchief, thoroughly disgruntled by the weather, the jolt, and disgusted by the obvious delivery occurring before her eyes. It wasn't a long journey by coach back to their various estates, but the usual route which circumnavigated the dangerous body of water was apt to be a tad bumpy. Davina wished that the horses would spook again, so that she might accidentally fall into the lap of the young man opposite her. Oh, how deliciously wicked, she thought. She ought to be punished for such brassness. Staring superstitiously at the debutante before him, Rufus Brotherstone felt a stirring in his own chest. He was soon to finish college. Maybe it was indeed time to start a courtship. She was devastatingly beautiful. His mother would certainly be overjoyed at the mere chance of an engagement. He took a moment to ponder when he felt the coach judder again beneath him. "Oh!" cried Lady Winstanley, as their comfortable transport began to rock a little. Then, out of nowhere, came a yell from the coachman, followed by a cacophony of noises from the horses, as the carriage came to an abrupt halt. "Whoa there! I say, what the devil is going on now?" "Apologies, sir, trees down and the way is blocked. Can't make a turn either. We've no choice but to take the lakeside road. Best to hold on, the horses are a bit spooked. Ha! Heya!" As the coach began moving again, the horses now set to navigate the famously perilous pass around deep water. Davina didn't need to pretend to be wide-eyed and frightened to garner attention. She looked at her father and grabbed onto the side of the carriage. "Daddy, isn't this awfully dangerous? Regina says Satan himself lives there." Her father didn't want to cause hysteria within the group, so was about to answer diplomatically when Miss Margaret Winstanley interrupted with, "That road isn't fit for purpose, let alone during a storm. Oh, my poor heart shan't be able to, oh!" She never got to finish what her heart wasn't able to withstand. As the storm raged and the horses grew wider, a strong gust of the wind blew one of the coach doors open and ripped it away, leaving a gaping void with no protection from the elements. The mere humans inside were no match for the velocity of the wheels and ferocity of the weather. Miss Margaret Winstanley was flung out with such vigor that she barely felt the spike from the fallen tree impale her like a lollipop. As the coach spun, Davina Hamilton Weston too was tossed out like the winning caber and joined her fellow passenger on the ground. Alas, so great was the impact that it severed her spinal cord, and she was decapitated. Her head kept on rolling until it reached the lake. Lord Hamilton Weston had tried to be valiant and reached for his daughter as she flew into the abyss, but his own self-preservation kicked in and grabbed a hold of the opposite door while wailing in anguish. Upon seeing the fate of his only child, he let go of his strong hold for a moment and was rewarded for his cowardice as the coach flipped and he too was evacuated from the interior in an unceremonious fashion. Screaming helped none, and his body landed in a nearby tree. It took around 5 minutes of pure agony for him to choke to death and succumb to the broken neck. The remaining passenger, Rufus Brotherstone, could only watch in terrified silence as the coach took its final spin. By some sort of miracle, both horses pulled free from their harness and galloped off into the night. The carriage was by no means so lucky as it plummeted straight into the lake. The water began to seep into the carriage with ease since there was no barrier. He tried in desperation to pull himself out. However, his arm had been wedged beneath the seating, which had been crushed in the fall, and he was trapped. By the time his lungs were filled, he was resigned to the watery death along with the coachman. And it is said that if you were to visit the site of Lake Von Barrow, which still remains today on the night of July 31st, make sure to stand very still as the clock strikes midnight, and you just might be able to hear the ghostly thundering of hooves, the terrified screams of the unfortunate passengers, and the sickening splash as the carriage took its final journey into the depths of the unforgiving waters. Does your town have a local legend? Have you ever traveled to the location or visited on the anniversary of an event? Did you experience anything yourself? Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube at Snarled so you never miss an episode. This week's podcast stories were edited by Sarah Lukasiewicz, narration by Blair Bathory, produced, edited, and mixed by Fitz Harris, executive produced by Gail Gilman, music by Sapphire Sindalo and Calvin Linderman. If you have a story you'd like to submit, send me an email at somethingscary@snarled.com. Don't forget to watch the video version of Something Scary over at youtube.com/snarled. And if you'd like to support the show and everything we do at Snarled, join our Patreon at patreon.com/snarled.